You are listening to Speak Now, jamming with my jazz at 95.7 FM WELT. Okay, today in the studio, Cynthia Gabbard. How you doing, Cynthia?
Good. How are you?
I am great. And her son as her main support person today, Dan. How you doing, Dan?
Doing great. Thank you.
Good. Thank you guys for coming in. Every month, one Friday out of the month, to focus on mental health, mental wellness, or mental illness. They're interconnected in some way, but today my guest Cynthia is going to we're going to have a fireside chat about mental illness. Okay, and so let's just start with Cynthia. Well, where do you want to start?
I can just actually start from the beginning.
Okay,
I've grown up with mental illness all my life.
Okay,
my mom was mentally ill. She had postpartum psychosis with each child, and my little sister's only 16 months younger than me. So Mom always tells the story of, the baby came home and Mom didn't. And so when we went up to see her, I was angry at her and wouldn't go talk to her. And then just all growing up, Mom would have what we called breakdowns at that time, and often would have to be hospitalized. At that time, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, which was a very scary word. I didn't understand mental illness. I was afraid of it. I don't think I was the only one in our family who we didn't want anybody to know.
When did you realize that your house was different?
I know I at least knew when I was in elementary school. Mom talked about it a lot, which, when I think about it, she was ahead of her time, really.
She talked about her diagnosis?
She did. She was not afraid to talk about it with people. But, me being her daughter was, I wasn't comfortable with it. And I was terrified of having mental illness myself. And
because you didn't understand it.
I didn't understand it. My mom saw some tendencies in me in terms of just I was a worrier, huge worrier as a little girl. I made myself sick over a weekend when our second grade teacher told us we were having a test. I was too sick on Monday to go to school.
Oh, wow.
The teacher actually wrote that on my report card that I worried too much. It just never ended. I was.
I wish I would have understood that. Let me just share a little bit of my interest in mental illness, mental health, is because as a little girl, I didn't know what it was, even until I became an adult. Kind of entrenched in the field. But my mom also had visited this building. It was a medical building, and she took my sisters and I with her when she went. But we just thought she was going to the doctor. Until years later, I began to reflect back and say, to really realize, wait a minute, that was a mental health facility. So it was never talked about in my home.
Right, and I don't remember a whole lot. I just do remember Mom having to go to the hospital and stay for maybe 2 weeks at a time. And I also remember that there were times growing up when one of us kids, I have a brother and then 3 sisters, felt specifically responsible for that certain time that she had to be hospitalized. And that was a horrible feeling.
And that was me.
Really?
Yes. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your story. So you also shared with me at some point when you were growing up, there was a fear that you would follow in those footsteps.
Yeah, and what I was mentioning is my mom, she didn't mean it, but she would often say, I'm worried about you. And, I would say, well, why? And she was just like, you're a lot like me. You worry a lot. And, it just kind of increased that fear.
Okay.
And by the time I was in high school, depression was really setting in, and I knew I needed help. And really the only place available, I mean, fortunately at the time, we had school counselors.
Okay.
And I saw that counselor regularly. And I don't know what I would have done without him. But then even in college, I sought out a counselor and paid for counseling almost weekly.
Yourself?
Yeah. It was important. I was not doing well.
So there was no medical coverage at that time to help cover it like it is today?
Well, I was under my parents' insurance, so
Okay.
I'm sure I didn't have to pay for the whole thing. But
But you did.
Yeah.
Yes. Talk about your experiences as an adult.
Um,
and Dan, if you want to
Sure.
jump in, you can jump right in.
Yeah, I can. It was, I had the depression. Like I said, it was very bad in high school, and also it was bad into my 20s. I met my husband and got engaged to him at age 27, and that's when I saw my first psychiatrist. And at the time, it was still just the depression.
Okay.
And he just put me on Prozac, and it really did take care of it. But then after we got married, and I decided to want to have, kids, then he just released me, and I just went off meds. So I stayed off meds from the time I was, trying to get pregnant for my daughter, and she's 2.5 years older than Dan, and I nursed, and so I had continued to stay off medication. And when Dan was, I'd say he was about 1. He had started off as a really colicky baby. And so we my daughter and my son and I were left, we were home a lot, isolated, because it was too hard for me to get us out. And that just seemed to be the last thing that finally, caused my bipolar to manifest itself.
Okay.
And I got to the point then when my depressions were to the point where I couldn't function. I couldn't get out of bed. I had to have my mother-in-law come over sometimes and, do the pile of laundry. And I had to be hospitalized probably 5 or 6 times while my kids were fairly young. And I remember one of the times in particular when I was in the hospital, I always seemed to have to stay for 2 weeks. And I felt so bad, thinking that my kids would think that I didn't want to be with them, and just feeling so helpless. And so also at that time they did occupational therapy. And so I remember working really, really hard. I made my son a little wooden boat and rowboat, and I made my daughter a little cardboard box and decorated it with shells and painted it, and they both still have them.
Really?
Yeah.
Nice.
And I just felt like they really understood, that was my way of telling them how much I fought because of them. They were always my driving force to get me to hang on and keep going.
Isn't that something? I can remember my mom saying that often as a little girl, and I didn't understand that. But yeah, that's awesome. Now, was that what happened then? What changed with your diagnoses?
It's one of those things that people do talk. It's not an easy thing sometimes to get a correct or accurate diagnosis. I mean, I started out with depression, and then when I sought my second psychiatrist after I was having difficulties with Dan, the diagnosis was rapid cycling major depression, and my mom at the time had been re-diagnosed with bipolar 1 and saw a lot of similarities, but this doctor would not consider it. So
Did he tell you why?
no, actually he didn't.
Okay.
But we had just gone through I think the frustration was that I was not very medicine resistant, or I was medicine resistant.
Okay.
And they do talk about that. It's like a third of people usually can find something fairly quickly that helps. Another third takes a while, but they're only partially helped with that, and then there's some who have no help. But I did have some help, but we were always, what they say, like adjusting the cocktail of medications. And finally, we got to a point where this doctor talked us into me having shock treatments, which was something that I was mortified of having, and my mother had them. So she had, strongly encouraged us not to do that. And this doctor just kept saying, oh, they're so much better. They're so much better. And I know they do help people. They do help some people a lot. But unfortunately for me, they didn't. They just
Can they make it worse?
Well, it just... I don't know this because I wasn't there but people who were there with me said, I would wake up and I didn't know where I was. I didn't know who I was, what was going on. But I did feel just kind of a dulling, just kind of a dulling of my personality. And so, and I also did have some memory issues, which did hang on for a long time. But then I did also learn that just profound depression can cause memory loss as well.
Wow. And your diagnosis, has it changed now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I went through it was the rapid cycling major depression, then went to a new doctor and got bipolar 2 with generalized anxiety disorder. And now I'm bipolar 1 with generalized anxiety disorder. And kind of interesting for me, and interesting now, is that they do have the tests now, the genetic tests, GeoMind, or I think the other one's called GeoSight, where they can do a swab, a saliva swab test, and they can kind of find out what medications might work best for you, what might not work well for you at all. And
is that new? Is that a new
testing? I had it done about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And it's not a fix-all either, because for me it really just kind of really solidified the fact that I don't respond very well to medication.
Okay.
But I do. My doctor, the nurse practitioner I see now, has called me like a poster girl for bipolar 1, in terms of I have all the symptoms, but what she said to me is your brain is unique in that it doesn't correspond. It doesn't respond to chemicals the way we would expect a bipolar brain to to respond. And so she's had to be really creative, and it's taken a long time. Yeah, and I mean, like, one thing, a real breakthrough was that she gives me a medication that is for restless leg syndrome, and it actually increases the level of dopamine in your brain. So they have to, the doctors, and they have to be very creative sometimes. I've been told I'm a challenge.
And you're patient with that process, it looks like.
Yeah, which is another thing that, as a patient, especially with mental illness, you have to be able to describe your thoughts, your feelings, the reactions you're having to medications, because they don't know, I mean.
Right. And they can't help you if you're not open to be descriptive.
And another thing with my bipolar 1 now has been interesting over the years, because I've been struggling with this Dan is 22 now. It's become more rapid cycling.
Explain, what does that mean?
That means between the manias and the depressions.
Okay.
The cycles. And when I first started having problems, it was almost always depression, with an occasional mania, say a couple weeks. And then it just got to the point about 5 years ago where it was every 2 weeks to the day. I would go just dramatic drop or dramatic up. My depressions have always been the worst, though. They've been the most profound and debilitating.
Has that increased, or not necessarily?
Over the last, I'd say, since the fall, things are starting to settle.
Okay.
Some for me, and I'm excited. I'm still not out of the woods yet, but I'm finding my downs aren't as totally debilitating. I'm able to still kind of get things done, and they're not lasting quite as long. So,
what does mania look like? Can you describe
for
that?
me?
Yes.
Well, for me, mania, I'm not as bad as some of the people I know in terms of just not as far out of control. But for me, no sleep. I can go for two weeks with absolutely no sleep, and I will not sit still, and I will chit chatter. It's very hard to get a word in. Yeah, hard to get a word in edgewise. Very creative. It's kind of hard. It's fun in a way, as far as you just feel like your brain, you feel anyway. It might not necessarily be true, but you feel like you're being very productive. And let's see. I also
is that when you write most of your poetry or your writings?
Not so much.
Okay.
I would say I would get like the house totally cleaned and the attic,
Look at Dan shaking his
head.
Yeah.
And I would do things like, we don't have a lot of money, but I would go and, I heard Jane Pauley one time talk about how she, when she was manic, she bought a French chateau. Well, I went and my husband talks about one middle of the night, he had to track me down, and I was at Myers, and I was buying, I think the green beans were like 4 cans for $1, and I was just
buying up all the green beans.
We ate green beans for a month. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I do have to watch that still. I have to watch not going. My thing is I like to go to the secondhand stores.
Okay.
So when I'm feeling up and I need to just kind of stay away.
Wow.
Because I get that attitude that, the credit card is just free money.
And I'm not working. My husband's got it.
It's not so good.
So Dan, how your mom said you are one of her biggest supports. How do you recall because you're 22?
Mm-hmm. Almost 23.
Okay.
In July.
How do you support, or what do you recall most significant at growing up with Mom?
It's kind of hard to explain, everything that, I went through watching her, and, obviously she went through and our family went through as a whole. But I would just say, the hardest thing for me when I was young was just, having to watch her, at the lowest of lows, that a human can possibly get. And, that's the hardest part, seeing someone like your mom feel like that. So, kind of my main focus was just always, wanting her to feel better. And, wanting her, even when she was, couldn't stop crying, I wanted to make her smile. That was kind of my way of helping. And, in a way, just dealing with that growing up, just kind of, it was hard. And I wouldn't want to wish that on anyone else. And I wouldn't want to have to see anyone go through what she went through. And I wouldn't want to watch, any family have to watch their mother go through that. But,
right.
As a family, just getting through that together, and, where she's at now, it's a lot better than where it used to be, and, we're all happy with that, and we're all proud of that. And, it kind of taught me some things like, my empathy skills, being compassionate, being able to listen to people, being strong-minded, obviously, being able to, have all this stuff going on at home, and then, turning around and going to, third grade or middle school or high school, and, not letting that affect my day, and, still doing the things that I want to do in my life and accomplish what I want to accomplish, and
absolutely.
Just wanting to make her proud and everyone else in my family proud. So, I just think the main things that it kind of taught me was just to, be there for people and know that, not, it's deeper than face value. You never know what people are going through, and you never know how down someone is, and that just kind of taught me when you can decide between, making someone smile and making someone frown, why make them frown, and I just think, one of my favorite things in the world is to just make someone smile who you can tell does not want to smile. And, I think that's from, what happened growing up with my mom. And it's just, it's awesome to see, her progress, and now, in turn, trying to help other people get through that same thing. It's amazing to see. And, I'm not going to act like it was a good thing or fun growing up, but, I think now it kind of taught us all a lot of things, and it made us all strong individually.
Think it made you mature quickly?
Yeah, definitely, because, I was dealing with things that I couldn't even, talk about with my friends, because no one has any idea, what I was going through, what she was going through. And, I just, like I said, I just kind of wanted to, make people smile who didn't want to smile, and, just take that and just not let that affect me, but at the same time do everything that I can to, be there for her. And that's just kind of how my thought process has always been with it.
So I wonder, was the school aware of what was going on for you as a youth?
When I was younger, yes, but then, by the time I got to high school or, middle school, it was just individual teachers.
Okay.
Some teachers would know that we're closer to our family, but, for the most part, it was just kind of a thing that, I went through, she went through, we all went through as a family, and,
there were no outside
my close friends were, my close friends knew.
Okay.
And that was kind of what I used to cope with it. I obviously, I had my mom, and, when my mom was feeling down, and, even though, I could tell she wanted to do everything she could as a mom, when she couldn't do those things, my sister would step in, my grandma would step in, and those are kind of the people that, and, just our family as a whole, and my close friends are, what helped get me through.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Really
I was
cool.
really careful as a mother, I guess because, when I was a child, I was, afraid of people knowing and stuff. And I guess I still did have that sort of feeling that I would be an embarrassment, to the kids. I didn't want them to feel vulnerable or to be judged, or so I was very quiet about it. And it was really hard because they were both huge into academics, sports and everything. And you know how you go and you meet somebody at a soccer game, and they say, hey, I'm so and so, and I'm a nurse, and it was like, well, what do you do? But I would also attest to what Dan is saying. He made me laugh every day, and that's something when he left I really missed. And both of my kids, I am just so proud of how empathetic they are to other people, and they are like magnets. People come to them. And my daughter, right now is working to get her master's degree in counseling.
Oh, wow. Awesome. That's
I'm afraid she's going to, do it to analyze me, but
she's probably already doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then to add to that, what my sister Jess is doing, when I was in school, it came up at Indiana where they were starting a mental health committee, and of course, that was something that kind of struck home for me, and was like, okay, well, I have all this experience, helping my mom and seeing what she went through, and so at school we did a committee for it, and I ended up being the president of that committee, and, just kind of did what I could do to try to erase the stigma of mental health and, help people on campus that are struggling and other students. So, it's just, been something that kind of just naturally happened. And,
awesome.
Yeah.
And that goes right into this next question. How can we as society reduce the stigma of mental illness?
Well, I think it is. It's education. And it's doing this. It's letting people tell their stories, yes. And just seeing that it's in a lot of places. I know for me, I've almost always been pretty open. I've always felt that, if people get to know me, I think I come across as a fairly, average Joe. And then when they find out that, I have mental illness, it might make them think, well, because I have said have had people say to me, "Oh, well, you don't look like you have, bipolar. You don't seem like, you don't act like you have bipolar." I know, exactly, right. Exactly. And I think to get involved and support things like NAMI, which I know we're going to talk about. Yes. I think through NAMI, I also did learn, and I wish that more people we're able to see that people who are mentally ill can, do things and let them, show what they can do instead of always assuming that they can't. Right. I think
that's being changed, which I wasn't even aware of how much is being changed when I talked to a couple of the members of the Carriage House. They are very active in the community doing things not just here, but worldwide. There's a photographer who started his own business, and there are awesome group of people that are there, members that are really movers and shakers.
Well, I maybe need to get more connected there because I am a member. I don't go very often.
Okay, well, you're a busy lady. Yeah, I want to talk about your involvement, but can we talk a little bit about your supports, your family supports? You've talked a lot about your family supports. Mm-hmm. What about your church support?
Well, I'd say the biggest support that they do for me is they have allowed me to write my articles.
Okay.
I went to my pastor 2 years ago. I had always wanted to write. I've always wanted to write. And I started thinking, you write about what you know. And I was feeling really sad because I haven't, been, all over the world. I don't have, these amazing jobs of being surgeons and all that. But I do know about mental illness. So I had written two pieces, one on how I think and feel when I'm depressed, and then one how I think and feel when I'm manic, and they're sort of like a stream of conscious kind of writing. And yes. I'm an English literature major, so anyway, when I showed them to my pastor, he also was an English literature major, and he said, hey, these are really well written, so let's get them out there. Okay. And so I've been doing that for 2 years now, and I feel like through that I have developed quite a voice. My own writing style, and I do have people come to me and ask
from the church.
Yeah,
and ask you about it.
Yeah,
awesome.
not a lot, but enough that keep me going.
A picture.
They'll say things like, hey, my sister's aunt. I believe their aunt too, but anyway, my neighbor's son has bipolar, and I take that to my neighbor, and she reads it, and her son reads it, and they give it to the grandparents, and it helps them all understand. And,
right.
So
that's awesome. What about you shared with me? You didn't have a lot of friends, but with your involvement with NAMI, you are stepping out and making those social contacts.
Yeah. I had friends before NAMI, but they had kind of dwindled in terms of, I decided it wasn't that they didn't care, but it was that it was just too dramatic to stay with, And I had one good friend say to me, and I think it's a really good example, was it's like there's a veil between us, Cynthia, and I can't penetrate it. And I just, when I was really depressed, it was very hard to communicate with me, or it was just kind of like, what's there? But when I started NAMI, before that, I really had only known a few people who were depressed. But that first class I took that I teach now, the NAMI peer-to-peer, the woman teacher, it was amazing. Everything I said, she would say, yep, been there, done that,
Yeah.
And she and I have remained friends, and I think I told you we both have bipolar 1, and it's like looking when she's really sick. It's like looking at my illness in the face. It's very hard to deal with, but she's always been there for me, and I'll always be there for her, and it makes for a pretty close friendship.
Yeah. And I don't want to tell your story for you, but you shared something that was so powerful about a friend of yours that was a nurse that you began to write. Can you share a little bit of that?
Yeah. This is a friend of mine from church, actually, and just a very good friend and always wanting to help me. But she really did get frustrated with me, and she would push me to do things and feel like I was, a little bit of judgment as far as, hey, you're not trying hard enough, that kind of thing. But I wrote a piece. It's one of my last pieces that I've written for my church, and it's called I'm More Like You Than Not. And in it I wrote the 10 top things that you can do for someone who's mentally ill. And I sent it to her, and, the friends who I'd sent it to who were mentally ill said, wow, that's you didn't miss anything.
Uh-huh.
And when I sent it to some of my friends who weren't mentally ill, like this friend, she sent back almost immediately her response, and she was like, Cynthia, this is wonderful. In fact, she asked me, have you considered, sending this to the editorial, and then she said, I wish I would have had this when we first met.
Wow.
Because maybe I could have been a better friend.
Yeah. I love that story because that's what this is. To be able to share your story. You never know who will hear and how that will push not just the person with the mental illness, but the family member or the friend who said to stop and think. Because that's what this is about. I want to read this quote. If I have this quote about, I think I don't have it in front of me. I'll find it, though, as we're talking. The one from John Coltrane, but that's okay. We'll get to that. I'm going to look that up. Now, let's talk about your support, what is really changing your life, and you're changing the lives of the people involved in NAMI. What is NAMI? And let's talk about how NAMI supports you.
NAMI is National Alliance on Mental Illness.
Okay.
It's the largest grassroots organization on mental illness. It's all volunteer. It's for not only the family members of people who are mentally ill, but for those who are mentally ill. We provide free educational programs for both the mentally ill and their families, and we provide free support groups, peer-led support groups.
Before we get into that, how did you get involved with the NAMI?
Well, I got involved 4 years ago. My mom saw an article in the newspaper about the NAMI peer-to-peer class,
okay,
which is a 10-week course for the people who are mentally ill. And the teachers are mentally ill, and we go through and we learn about the different mental illnesses. We learn about hospitalization. All of a sudden, I just finished teaching this today, and I can't think what else. Some kinds of ways to deal with your mental illness. It's kind of like a good doorway into NAMI.
Okay.
And the first day that we were in there, the teachers talked a little bit. Well, they introduced themselves and they said what their involvement with NAMI was. And one of the teachers, said, I facilitate support groups. I teach this peer-to-peer class. I go to state conventions. I go to national conventions, and I'm on the board of directors. And then he asked us to go around and, say what we'd like to get out of the class. And I said, and for me, this was like a huge turning point, I said, well, when I'm recovered, I would like to do everything that you're doing. And he said, wait a minute, you don't have to be recovered to get involved with NAMI. He's like, you pretty much jump in where you're at, when you can do it, and there's always there's that allowance for, if you need to step back. And I think for me, it was just that permission, that permission to have the opportunity, if I had to fall. And I just started right away. I started going to the support groups. I got trained.
Wait a minute before you even go there. So I want to give this brief bio of you. So you are now involved with the board of directors. You are now involved with the NAMI Connection peer-led support groups. You are involved with the peer-to-peer recovery course. You are writing about mental illness for NAMI and writing about mental illness through your church's newsletter. That's awesome. Okay, I got it. I had to get that out. So now go ahead. Where do you want to start? With each one of those, or, where do you want to start?
Well, I'll say my favorite thing out of all of those is to be a mentor. I'm sorry, to be a facilitator for the support group.
Okay.
And when I first went to the support group, the thing that's so powerful about it is that no matter what you say about how you're thinking or feeling, there's people who have been there, done that. And all of a sudden what that does is that takes away the guilt and the shame, because it makes you realize, oh, these things that I'm thinking and feeling and doing, they're not as a result of a character flaw. They're part of this mental illness. And so I just found that really healing. And I tend to be someone who can articulate really well. So I immediately, trained to be a facilitator. And what was also exciting for me was, I've wanted so much to help people, to make something good out of this,
Yes.
And I would have never dreamed that this is the way I would be helping people. But I am able to help people, and that's a joy for me.
Yes. So your favorite thing in that, which group is that?
That's
that
the
peer-to-peer?
NAMI Connection.
Oh, that's the connection.
Yeah, NAMI Connection is the weekly support group, and we actually have 3 of them going on right now. I have been able. The other thing I do like is I just recently was able to mentor 3 people to become facilitators, and so now we have 4.
Nice.
And just hoping we can continue to do that. The teaching of the class is also it's also a nice thing to do. It's co-taught, and I'd explain a little bit about it. It's the NAMI peer-to-peer recovery course, and that's always really nice. Like I said, it is usually the first introduction to NAMI that people have, and I think it's good when they. In fact, somebody just said today was our last class, and they were saying, well, I think I do have a better understanding, and I may start coming to the support groups.
How can we find out about that? If you want
NAMI,
to get involved,
just call the NAMI office. I'll see if I can find that number real quick.
Okay.
Well, or online.
Here we go.
There's shut up. Oh. Well, that's not. This is the NAMI national. If I had my phone,
that's
I
okay.
Could
well, that's
anyway,
okay.
it's on. Yeah, it's NAMI, NAMI Fort Wayne, and it's gosh, I can't believe. We'll stop that time, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it's on 2200 Lake Avenue.
Okay. Okay.
Anyway, let's see. At least I could tell you, there are definitely always 7:00 meetings on Tuesday nights at the Carriage House. So that is 3327 Lake Avenue,
Okay.
Fort Wayne, Indiana, with a zip of 46805.
Okay.
So that's every Tuesday night. There's a meeting for those who have mental illness. Then there's a separate meeting for the family members. And the 4th Tuesday of every month, they have education night.
Okay.
And those are open to public, and those are very interesting. They always have something about mental illness, different places that have programs for mentally ill. We'd really like to see more people come to that.
That's open to the public?
The education night is. The support groups are not. You have to be mentally ill to be a leader of the support group for the mentally ill, and the only people who can come to that are people with mental diagnosis.
Have a diagnosis.
Diagnosis, and then the family members are the same. We don't even let nurses or anything come in and observe. It's just that confidentiality part is
that's nice.
Just crucial.
What about the education night? How can the public find out about that? Contact the Carriage House. Is that held at the Carriage House?
Yeah,
okay.
Actually it is.
Okay.
It's through NAMI. So I'm not sure if they would know at the Carriage House what particular topic we were having, but definitely if you called our NAMI office,
they would be able to connect.
Yeah.
us. Yes. What about the board of directors? What is that involvement, and what does that and how are you involved there?
Well, I'm just one of the members. We meet about, I think it's every 2 or 3 months, and we make decisions for the group as a whole. We work on the bylaws, and we get started programs, especially to raise money and awareness, and then try to get other people to get involved. There is, the next event we have coming up is the Run White and Blue NAMI Fort Wayne's 5K run and 1 mile walk at Foster Park, and that's on July 4th. So there's been a lot of meetings on that. It's not something that I'm working on, but
is that open to the public?
Yeah. In fact, let's see. You have to register to be a runner. To be a walker, no registration. And then also they're seeking sponsors to help with the offset the cost. But it's supposed to keep it affordable to the general public.
And that's coming up July 4th.
July 4th.
And the contact information is through NAMI of Fort Wayne. Okay, great. I have Steve Manning is the one in charge of that particular event, and I have his website here or his email. I don't know if that would be helpful. That's the gentleman who's a photographer.
Is it?
Started his own photography business. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Amazing. Yeah. So you can share that if you like.
Yeah, it's Steve, STEV, _M, at NAMIFortWayne.org. And that's just NAMI, all lowercase. All of it's lowercase. So it's steve.m at NAMIFortWayne.org. Or there's actually another, Marilyn, MARILYN .m at NAMIFortWayne.org.
Thank you. What about your writing about mental illness for NAMI? How are you involved? How does that take place?
Do you mean in my head?
There too.
I just have, I don't know, I just had a real drive calling to start writing about it and having people get a feel for what it's like. And, as I mentioned, my first two were, my first one in particular, I think it's one of my best pieces, but it was scary when I turned it in to be published because it was very personal and self-revealing, and it was really dark. It talked about even when I have suicidal ideations and how I think through those.
Now, was that published in the NAMI newsletter or the church?
No, that was in the church.
Okay.
I started out publishing in the church, and then I did show all of my pieces to the NAMI editor, and I finally got one that stuck with her, resonated with her, and I was able. I wrote every month or every quarter they do a recovery story.
Okay.
So I was able to do that one season, and I've written, as I mentioned, this one about the top 10 things that you can do to help people with mental illness, and that has just recently been published, and that was in both my church and
NAMI. Yeah. Very good.
I've written about the importance and the healing nature of the groups, and my one thing that I say about those groups, I just can't stress them enough. I know as the facilitator, one of our big, we're not therapists, we don't diagnose, but we try to make sure everybody gets a fair chance to talk, and I remember one time I was sharing, I wasn't facilitating that group, and I was feeling really guilty because I felt like I was taking up too much time. But when it got halfway across the room, there was a woman there who was new. She'd never been there before, and she just looked at me and she said, you articulate so well what I think and feel, but cannot say. And I just think that really says it for the support groups, you know, because you may not be able to say what you're going through, but somebody else can.
And and that moves you forward. Actually, it helps move you forward.
Yeah, and well, to have somebody else be feeling the same way, it's it's very validating.
Yes,
you know.
Yes, awesome. So there are other programs. We talked about those, but there are other programs that NAMI has. Also, can you talk a little bit about those?
Yes, and I have sent you. I mean, these are going to be all yours.
Okay,
I've been very busy. Yes, I've been very busy getting things ready for you.
Thank you.
As a teacher for the NAMI recovery class, I've always got just tons and tons of literature, and
awesome.
This is also something that becoming a member does help us with. We are able to, and I should show you real quick, because we are able to get information on so many things. I mean, this is all information that we can get from NAMI. We've got special things like depression in women. There's stuff on all the different diagnoses.
That's awesome, Cynthia.
Yeah. So
we'll talk about the Faith Net, that program.
Sure.
That NAMI actually is.
Faith Net is. Well, let me just real quick. I'll go through the ones that we have. The ones we have here are the Family to Family, which is the free 12-week course, educational course for those who are family members of those who are mentally ill.
Okay.
Then we have the NAMI Family Support Group, which meets at 7:00 every Tuesday night. And then we have the peer-to-peer class, which is what I was just talking about, the 10-week course that we just finished. And then we have NAMI Connection, which is every week. Also, there's a couple other meetings, but 7:00 is a definite every week on Tuesday nights. And then, the new thing that we've brought in this year is called NAMI Faith Net. And we just have a really great group of people who are going out and doing presentations to the churches. And where that originated from was that research had shown that people with mental illness and their families very often turn to their churches for help. That's the first place they turn, and that churches really aren't very equipped to help. And so NAMI developed this program. And what the presentation does is it brings some basic information about mental illness. They give information about what NAMI does here in Fort Wayne, and also we provide them with a booklet on other things that are offered in the community.
Okay. And these are all volunteers. You guys are all volunteers.
Yeah, and they're memorizing their parts and telling parts of their story at the same time.
That's powerful. Very powerful. Wow. Oh, I don't want you to leave without sharing those 10 things. So I want to allow you any other part of your journey that we haven't been able to touch on that you'd like to share before we get to this final, your voice, how you found your voice and your vision for the future. So have we missed anything that that we wanted to talk? You wanted to talk about?
I guess I'm really excited to be able to have this opportunity to speak because I do just think it's so important for people to hear our stories. And I know that my illness is a chronic illness, and I can't. It's not like I'm going to just recover and never have to struggle with it again. So I have learned to take each day at a time and just be happy in those moments. But I think you'll see too when I read it that all of us, we just need people to be there with us, and while they can't maybe understand they can just be there, and help us walk our journey and
that's a good way
care.
to look at it.
And we mention, often mental illness is called the no casserole illness.
Oh, what does that mean?
Well, and that's one thing that I do touch upon, and that a lot of us do notice is when you're mentally ill and you have a crisis, people really don't quite know what to do. Where they would normally, send cards, come visit, bring a casserole, help take you to the grocery store or whatever. They just kind of stay back because they're not sure what to do. And the other thing that I've
what should we do?
I'll step in there.
Yeah.
I think the big thing for that. I think the big thing for that, just based on what I've seen, is that you can't necessarily fix that person that has, a mental illness. And as much as I just want to snap my fingers and have it all go away for my mom, you can't. So I think just, being there and letting, like she said, just letting them know that you're there for them, and that if they need to talk, you're there to talk. If they need someone to just sit with them and watch a movie for, watch 8 movies in a row, be there for them. And, that's just the biggest thing, is that realizing that you can't fix it, but, you can do a lot. And you can, just even making, like she said, just making her laugh or making her smile for a second, that eases the pain. So I just think just being there and knowing that you're not going to solve it, but you can help.
Wow.
Yeah, they call it the gift of presence. And there's been times when I've been so depressed and I'm afraid to be alone just because I'm having such, horrible, scary thoughts.
Okay.
And I have had before, yes, family usually, they try to help first, but there have been times when family hasn't been able to help. And when friends have come in, the frustration for them is that they don't see, immediate response.
Result.
Like, I spent an hour, or I spent 2 hours with her, and, it didn't do any good.
Wow.
But it did, and that's the thing I have a hard time explaining to people. It did.
And that helps, because we're not supposed to see the results. We're supposed to just go on the journey behind, or wherever. Just go on that journey and don't worry about seeing the results, because the individual
you can't take the
results.
You can't take the responsibility for it either.
That's
you can't take the responsibility for helping me get through my illness. You can't fix me. You can't set the pace. I have to do it. And I have to do it. I do it to the best of my ability. And that might not be what you think I should be able to do. You know what I
right.
mean?
Yes.
That whole thing about, you're not working hard enough. When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? And even having someone say to me, you don't pray the right way, or, your faith's not strong enough. I've had lots of things like that been said to me.
Yep, it's not an easy thing to help with, and it's not an easy thing to have to watch, and it just takes a lot of patience and, like I said, a lot of empathy, and just being there for somebody that you love, and that's kind of the bottom line with it.
Yeah.
Dan gives me hugs. He's a great hugger, and one of my things is when I'm going through these cycles over and over and over again is he'll say to me, I'll say, I'm not doing this right. I'm just not doing this right, and Dan will say, Mom, there's no right way to get through, major depression. Just get through it.
You're awesome.
And he is awesome. He is. And then he'll say, you'll get through it. And I'll say, no, I won't. And he'll say, yes, you always get through it. And just, it's just awesome to have him. And both of my kids are just, they're so proud of me, and I spent so much time feeling, guilty and sad that, that I'm sick, and, that I've made their life, not quite as carefree. And then I see them, and who they are and what they are, and then that they can turn around and, be so proud of me.
Yeah. And honey, mental illness is not the reason that we do whatever we do to our kids. We are going to screw them up. That's what parenting is. That's where the forgiveness comes in, and I'm sorry, and that's where the love, that's where it all comes in. It has nothing to do with the mental illness. That's what parents do.
That's really interesting, because some of my friends, I have one friend who is mentally ill, and we think it's because of our mental illness.
No, it's
and
not.
we feel guilty about it. And, then I'll talk to one of my other friends who doesn't have a mental illness, and she'll be like, what?
I know, right?
Yeah.
And
Everybody
then we
does
say we
that.
love you, and hey, let's keep it moving.
But I think for me, because I grew up with a mom who was mentally ill,
Yes.
and I just didn't quite really know what.
Yeah.
And then we do joke in our support group about, what is normal,
Yeah. Well, you've helped me today, even to look back at my childhood in a different way. I thank you. I want to talk about this voice you found. You found your voice.
Yeah, I was struggling so much, and when you're really depressed, just profoundly depressed, I could barely speak. I couldn't, and I wanted so badly. People wanted to know, what's going on? How can we help you? What can we do? And I just, through what I've been doing with NAMI in leadership and with my writing, I feel like I finally have found a voice.
Yes.
And my writing started out being, I'm an English literature major, and so my writing was very collegiate at first, and it was going into a newsletter, and people it was very interesting, but people mentioned, I tried to read this in the car line, so that's why this one I decided to drop down to 10 things.
And make it
And
real.
Yeah.
And
then I wrote a really short thing to people who are bold enough to speak about their mental illness.
Can you share, what is that, the 10 things?
It's this thing right here.
Can you read that?
Yeah, can I?
Yes, please.
1, treat me as an individual and not as my illness. Rest assured that I am more like you than not. Know that I have the same desire to be loved and accepted as you do. Therefore, do not be afraid of me, avoid me, or ignore me. 2, acknowledge that my mental illness is a medical illness that may have environmental triggers. Do not blame me for being mentally ill. 3, give me a voice. Allow me to manage my own treatment if possible and to tell my own story. Acknowledge and validate my experience. 4, allow me to be responsible for my own journey towards recovery. Let me set the pace. Do not pressure me, guilt me, or shame me to move faster than I am ready or able to do. Accept as I must that this is likely a lifelong struggle. 5, do not judge me or make assumptions about me. My illness happens to affect my thoughts, feelings, and actions at times. This doesn't make me intellectually, morally, or ethically inferior. 6, do not conclude that my mental illness is a result of sin, character flaws, or spiritual warfare. Do not question the strength or sincerity of my faith or my prayer life. 7, lift me and my family up in your thoughts and prayers. 8, help me and my family when I am in crisis, the same as you would for any other crisis. Express your empathy and concern. Ask how we are doing. Bring casseroles. Help with rides and special tasks or errands as needed. Send cards. Call us. Visit us. Give us hugs. When I am in the hospital, visit me. Help me and my family to feel valued, missed, and loved. 9, don't assume there is a magic pill to relieve all my symptoms of a mental illness, and therefore judge me as sinful or negligent if my medications don't alleviate them all. And 10, be my friend. Help me celebrate my uniqueness and my victories. Support me in my struggles. Hold my hand and walk alongside me on this difficult journey.
That's nice.
Can I read my little thing to
Yes,
those?
yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
To those who live with mental illness, if you are bold enough to speak openly and without shame about your struggle, I would like to share these words of encouragement. I really admire you for your strength, bravery, persistence, and resilience. Because I struggle with bipolar disorder, I identify with your challenge. Having a mental illness can at times render you unable to function. It can bring your life to a standstill and complicate and interfere with your plans and force you to rely on others for so much. I want to share a few things I have learned along the way that have served me well. We don't take joy in our suffering. but we can take joy in the gifts that we acquire through our suffering. Furthermore, it is a truly beautiful thing when we are able to put those special gifts to use to help others. I'm certain that you already are and will continue to do just that. I know that you inspire many and are a beautiful example of resilience, courage, perseverance, and faith. You inspire me. You are not a victim. You are truly a survivor. Remember to celebrate your victories over this illness and your bravery, strength, and courage. I do. I just wanted you to know.
Very nice. Wow, that's powerful. I like those. What is that? The 10 things? It's called the 10 things?
Yeah, well, the title of the article is I Am More Like You Than Not.
Okay.
And then I just have a little thing in there that talks about how it's important for us to examine ourselves and
yes.
In the way that we help others.
Awesome. So now what's in the future for, what future, what's your vision for the future?
For me,
for Cynthia?
For me, I would like to continue. I love, like I said, I love doing the groups. I would love to continue to train people to be group leaders. We're thinking that with the NAMI FaithNet presentations, that there will be more of a demand for trained facilitators because we're hoping some of the churches might want to start groups within their churches and hoping they'll want to come to our groups and we may need to have more groups. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I would like to continue teaching the class. I would definitely like to keep writing. I've written for the NAMI Fort Wayne newsletter called the Fort Wayne Update. I've written for the Indiana, and I do have a goal to write for the national. I also think about
You're
writing.
On your way.
Yeah, I want to start a blog. I've thought about trying to get published in. There's a magazine called Biopolar. A lot of wanting to do things with my writing, and I just mentioned to you real briefly that I did not, when all through my illness with my depression, my creativity was totally shot. And that really made me sad because I'm a very creative person. And just in since last fall when things have kind of been lifting, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I just started doing floral arrangements in pots or coffee mugs, and I call them flowers in a cup. And I wrote an article about that, too, called Flowers in a Cup with Kindness. And it's the way I have found to develop or to celebrate my recovery. And I make those and I give them, to people.
Nice.
And,
Very nice. Yeah. And
I want to be a grandma.
Is that anywhere?
No,
not.
I'm willing to wait.
That's okay, right? Don't rush that. I want to share this. I did find that quote about John Coltrane, but I wanted to share this that came from Glenn Close, that actually talks about the stigma. And you may have heard this, but I've read this before and I want to read it today. It is an odd paradox that a society which can now speak openly and unabashedly about topics that were once unspeakable still remain largely silent when it comes to mental illness. That's Glenn Close. And so I think that, yes, there is a silence, but I also think that we are beginning to speak more and more, and society is becoming more and more open to not just listening, but to sharing their own stories, because mental illness touches everybody to some degree, if it's a friend or a neighbor or a family member or oneself. And so I think that's really powerful there.
Yeah, and I know at least with the FaithNet thing going on in Fort Wayne, it's just amazing. The churches are just really working hard to develop their own ministries. You can really see that, and I would love to see this kind of a program not be directed to more than just the churches.
Okay,
just get out there and let everybody know and let people tell their stories. And
beautiful. Beautiful. Wow. Final thought, young lady. And also you, if you have something to say, Dan.
I guess my final thought would just be, first off, thank you for letting us come on and kind of giving my mom the chance to, share her journey. And it's just, it's been great to see her go through, not great to see her go through her struggles, but it's great to see her, go through all that and be where she is right now.
Right.
And, it was extremely hard growing up, but, I wouldn't have traded my experiences or my family or, my mom or anyone, or anything that I've been through. I wouldn't have traded it for anything. So, that's my final thought.
Nice. Thank you. And Cynthia Gabbard.
Yeah, I just cannot thank you enough for letting me do this. I have just, it's my dream to have been able to tell, part of my story. And it's been really so good for me to just jump into NAMI and start helping other people and being able to have people accept me where I'm at. And
that's good.
Yep,
right there.
I'm just
that's the final thought right there.
Keep pushing forward.
As we talked, that's one of the things that I continue to affirm in you is you are perfect just like you are. There's nothing, whatever you share, however you share it, is completely and totally you. So here's a quote that I share with you. This is by John Coltrane. And a gentleman who I am I respect very much, shared this quote through, he used this at the beginning of his book. And I'm sorry, I'm going to own this and I'm going to use it over and over again. And it simply says, I never even thought about whether or not they understood what I'm doing. The emotional reaction is all that matters. As long as there's some feeling of communication, it isn't necessary that it be understood. That's giving you a voice, that's giving me a voice, that's giving anyone a voice to just be free to be. I love that quote. That's by John Coltrane. Thank you for coming on. I am so honored that you took your afternoon to be here with me, you guys both. You're listening to Speak Now, right here at 95.7 WELT.